Hey, all you rad dads out there.
So, Jonny, thank you so much for joining me on the Rad Dad show today. Who are you?
Who am I? I am Jonny Temple. I live in Brooklyn, New York. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I've lived in Brooklyn now for 30 years. I am a musician and a book publisher. I run a book publishing company called Akashic Books, and we publish like 30 to 40 books a year. And I am also the father of two children. You may hear them passing
Yeah,
in the woods.
that's
Um,
great.
I have two sons, Arthur and Abraham, who are 15 and 13.
Okay.
And I play music in three bands right now that are actually active. Two old bands, Soulside, which was a band that recorded with Discord Records
Right.
in Washington, D.C., and Girls Against Boys, who put out albums with Touch and Go Records and Jade Tree and Geffen and Adult Swim. I think those were our major record labels. And then I'm in a new band called Fake Names
Fake
um,
names. Okay.
with some great musicians. So yeah,
Awesome.
that's
So,
me.
so two kids, bunch of bands. You're a book publisher as well.
A great
Um,
wife. I have a great wife, Cara, who's
right.
right now has a new job being executive director of a nonprofit in Brooklyn called the Brooklyn Arts Exchange.
Okay.
So I have a powerhouse wife too.
Wow. So yeah, you guys are busy. You must have a lot going on in your house right now.
We do that a lot and nothing.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the times, right?
Yeah.
The pandemic has kind of, in certain ways, slowed a lot of things down, but in other ways, made it feel a lot more hectic.
Yeah.
So Jonny, do you consider yourself a rad dad?
I'm a pretty rad dad. I think so. Yeah. Like most people, I have my major deficits, my glaring deficits. But I do bring it as a dad on some levels that I know my kids appreciate, and hopefully helps to make them better guys.
Yeah. So how do you define a rad dad? What does that mean to you?
Um, I guess someone who's very involved in the lives of their kids and uh, brings energy and ideas and creativity to their interactions with their children, and is of course responsive to their children's needs, but present is a good start.
Yeah.
We know a lot of men haven't been able to quite get to the first stop of presence. A lot of men have set such a low bar that unfortunately perhaps it's a little bit easier to be a rad dad than it should be.
Like, and you mean easier to meet that bar than maybe it would be for a mom to meet the bar for her? Is that sort of
Perhaps,
what you mean?
perhaps I do see that dads will. I notice that. I notice it less now that my kids are older. But dads would get all sorts of props for doing things that are more sort of like taken for granted from women and moms. Um, but having said that, I know a lot of rad dads. So
Yeah. So that being present, that's the first step, and then I mean you talked about some other things like creativity. So how important is that to your family? I imagine quite important given your background, but how does that fit into your family dynamic?
it doesn't. It's not really part of the family dynamic on an explicit, overt level. Um, I think it's like the creativity is sort of in us, and so I think both my wife and I live creative lifestyles in the work that we do. Creativity is part of the fabric of our daily lives, and I think that is conveyed to our kids. But again, not it's not something we're necessarily talking about. Um,
Yeah,
and
or forcing it on them or something like that.
yeah, um, but an appreciation of art, of course, is important, and music and stuff. But it's, of course, it's a tricky business trying to turn your kids onto the art and the music that you like.
Yeah, it's funny how though, especially when they're younger. But yeah, I mean, talk to lots of dads. I have young kids, 2 and 5, but I've talked to dads of teenagers and older kids as well, and that sort of continues on. Something I certainly noticed: your kids pick up on what you're interested in. They may not be that interested in it, but they're kind of excited that you're interested in it. So that's kind of a neat thing. And so having that kind of culture around you, by the very nature of that, exposes them to it.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, our kids are lucky to be around. My wife, I should also say, used to be a modern dancer. She was, and in fact, she was danced within a phenomenal Canadian dance company based in Montreal, company Marie Chouinard, which is like a groundbreaking, award-winning, transgressive, beautifully curated, and anyway, it's a wonderful dance company. And when I first started dating my wife, she was actually living in Montreal. But
cool.
But so that's another aspect. She runs an arts organization now, but she herself is also an artist.
Oh, very cool. So yeah, I mean, this is, like you said, but part of the fabric of both of your beings, right? So I'm curious, are your kids sort of interested in music? You're active still. You've been active for many years in music.
Not particularly. My kids aren't that. They like music, of course, but they don't have like a sophisticated engagement with music. They kind of go in and out of it, and they've sort of played it, taken some music lessons and stuff. But no, they're not that. But I certainly became much more involved with music in my late high school and then college years, is when it really, and I hadn't been like a musician from being a little kid. Of course, I had taken music lessons and whatnot when I was a kid, but I really became a musician at age like 16, 17, 18. So I hold out for my kids that music will become a more important part of their lives as they grow older. And it's fine if it doesn't. It's totally fine if it doesn't. But music is one of my first loves. So I'd like to be able to share it with them and there's a lot we can share about music, but I'd like to be able to go deeper with them.
Yeah.
But it's not a hole in my life.
Right. Yeah. It's one of those things. I mean, we always, as parents, you always kind of want your kids or hope that they are interested in the things that you're interested in, and in some ways turn out just like you. But it's their journey too, right? So
absolutely.
I think you can sometimes push them away from that if you try and force it too much. So just kind of have to let it be. So I'm curious, Jonny, where were you in your career? Like, kind of take me back to when you first had, it would have been Arthur, I guess, is your oldest, right? Yeah. So when you had Arthur, whereabouts were you sort of in your career and your journey? Were you playing music at that time?
That was 2005 when he was born. And I stopped being like a full-time musician around 2002. And I played music like very seriously and often as my profession from basically like 1988 to 2002. That was when music was my primary occupation for those years. But I started publishing on a sort of hobby level in 1997.
Okay.
So there was this period between 1997 and 2002 where I was publishing books, just a few books, 1 or 2 books a year, while still being a full-time professional musician. And then around 2000, 2001, 2002, I sort of segued from being a full-time musician to being a full-time book publisher who also doing some music. But music really at that point took sort of a back seat to book publishing and then starting a family, having kids.
Right.
And then in the past, well, we can circle back around to this later, but in the past year or two, music has become much more a part of my life. But it's a long way of saying that at 2005, when the first kid was born, I was, mostly a book publisher, still doing occasional gigs with the band Girls Against Boys. It's particularly in Europe. Over the years, we've played a lot of festivals and shows in Europe, but that was sort of more as a side thing,
Okay. So
and
going through a transition in your life in kind of more ways than one, kind of moving from music to book publishing is kind of your main gig. Plus now you've got a baby.
yeah.
Did you have any fears about becoming a dad?
Anyway,
Any fears?
yeah. I mean, I think I could have gone on not being a dad. My throat's a little dry. Hold on a second.
No, that's okay.
Um, I had fears, the regular financial fears, also the what happens to one's social life, what happens to one's hobbies, etc. But I'm really good at compartmentalizing. So the fears they didn't really drive me crazy. I'm a very anxious person. I carry, as are I think most people in this era that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very anxious era. And I say that simply because it really does seem to me that 25 years ago, there was less anxiety.
Yeah.
But so I carry a lot of anxiety. I always have in all my life, and anxiety is like an engine for me. So I wouldn't say that the fears of being a parent added substantially to the level of anxiety that I already routinely haul along with me.
Right. So yeah. So I think everybody has those, certain little fears and almost kind of wondering what's life going to look like afterwards. But what you're sort of saying is it wasn't something that, you were kind of terrified when the baby came or anything like that.
I'm really good at I might not, I'll be fully in the moment once the moment is there.
Yeah.
But there are things that'll make me anxious, have anticipatory anxiety.
Yep.
But with I think I do a pretty good job of living in the moment, and so there are lots of things I should have been anxious about, but again, my anxiety plate's pretty full.
Right. And so did becoming a dad, did it change you at all? Or maybe in what ways, maybe if you could describe, did it change you?
Definitely fundamentally changed me. I had some insights into, the big questions in life. I was raised Jewish, but I'm an atheist, and I've been an atheist for many years. And so I liked about having kids, like having this higher purpose that's almost like a religion. It's something outside of you that's more important than you are.
Yep.
So that's one thing that changed me, is it sort of gave me a really good religion substitute, something that's, this thing to even though I think in some ways having children is the ultimate, most selfish and self-centered and egoistic act. On the other hand, it does pull something outside of your focus. Is not on yourself. It's on something else, someone else. And again, it's more important than you are. So that was one of the ways that I changed. And on a related level, as soon as I had it's like might have been the day my first child was born, was like, oh, I understand war now. Like, I understand why people kill each other, because this helpless little thing, I would absolutely, if I was forced to, I would have to kill to protect this thing. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit related to like the religion substitute, again, having something that you would kill for. And it gave me, and then realizing, of course, that a majority of the people on the planet do have children and go through this. Yeah. And so it sort of gave me a little bit more of an insight into an aspect of humanity. Lots of people don't have kids, so I'm not going to say that part of being human is having children. That's bullshit and not true. But it is a common experience to have kids, and yeah, made me understand war.
Yeah, I think kind of, what I'm kind of hearing from you there is it almost like, and people kind of describe this in different ways, but um, maybe teaches you a bit more empathy. Is that maybe part of it? Like kind of ability to kind of understand, other people's motivations and
I don't
things a little
know.
bit better, or maybe it's,
Sure.
you could talk about kind of, taking you out of yourself and giving you that sort of higher purpose. So maybe it's that change from kind of that maybe self-centered, which I don't mean to sound like a bad thing. And that, people who don't have kids are self-centered. I don't I don't mean to say that, but maybe that's part of it too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question about empathy. I think empathy probably does figure into how I think about it, but I haven't been thinking of that word. I maybe don't want to be quite that generous with my own self-assessment.
So yeah, so that's really interesting. Kind of looking at it like a bit of a higher purpose, or maybe you know, having maybe given up sort of that, I guess that idea in terms of religion, but now applying this in terms of like your purpose being caring for this child and the development of this child. I think a lot of people feel like, as I talk to dads on this show, I think a lot of people feel like they don't want to sort of, or they feel like it's cheesy or something to admit that your kids give you purpose in life.
Hmm.
But I think it's very common, and I think it makes a lot of sense, right? That
I would think. I mean,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, it seems obvious, that they. It doesn't mean that it's a good purpose or a bad purpose, but it gives you purpose, and
yeah,
hopefully it's a good purpose. But again, um, I think that as a species, having a sense of purpose is psychologically helpful.
yeah. And so I'm
You
I'm
know,
curious, like,
I'm not religious, but I respect religion because I don't respect all religion, and I have huge problems with institutionalized religion. But I am comfortable with this notion that we need psychological crutches
mhm,
as a human to make it through the, you know, the beautiful tragedy that is the world that we live in. We need our crutches, and religion is one of them, and parenthood is a major other one. It's also a
so
big distraction,
yeah,
the sense of, and that's why it goes to the sense of purpose, not necessarily in some positive way, but in a sense of purpose, a distraction. Um, we need to sublimate. This psychological concept of sublimation, sublimating your core base desires into sort of, so and that's what to me, like actually like a lot of book publishing and music making and creativity is just a way of sort of channeling energy in a positive, in either a positive direction or a non-destructive direction.
right. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that's something that I think comes up with a lot of parents. I think in general is being a parent can be really tough, and I think there is a real possibility that you can lose some of yourself in that.
Definitely.
And so having some of those outlets can be helpful in so many ways, right? Whether it's channeling energy in a positive way, or creating something, but even just kind of maintaining a sense of yourself.
Yeah.
Now you've kind of talked a little bit as we're chatting about anxiety, and I agree with you. I think it is a lot more common now than it used to be. We live in
I
a
see it
world
also
that's
like when I pre-pandemic, I've traveled a lot and different places, whether it's Asia or spent a lot of time in the Caribbean, all over America. So when I'm talking about, I'm not just saying like here in New York City, it seems like a lot of people are anxious. I see anxiety like
yeah.
worldwide.
Well, I think there's a lot more going on in the world, and we know a lot more about what's happening. We have a lot more information coming in. I'm curious, like you said, this has been something that you have kind of dealt with for a long time. So I would say, maybe especially with young kids, but as time goes on, I'm sure it's the same. Like being a parent is quite anxiety inducing at times. So, how have you kind of managed to deal with that? You kind of talked about compartmentalization. Is that kind of the primary strategy for dealing with that? Because I think that's something a lot of parents deal with, is kind of the stress and the anxiety, and maybe not having that filter down to your kids.
Yeah. Um, I'm lucky to have a life where art is a big part of it, music and literature. And, reading actually, I will say, is sort of the closest I have to like meditation. And it's not meditation, but it's the closest I have. But reading is, I've been a book publisher since 1997, but reading has perhaps never been more important to me. Um, but also since the
Yeah.
pandemic started, but also with having kids and music has resurged in my life. But I find a lot of solace in music and literature, even music and literature that have very difficult themes, or disconsolate literature. It's still a solace and a balm
Mm-hmm.
for me. So that's a big part of it. And then I have my there's the alcohol and related habits. Coffee is an
Yep.
important, but although I don't, coffee doesn't reduce anxiety, but it does provide happiness.
Yep. For sure. Yeah. So we all kind of find those ways to deal with those things. So, um, okay. So had your first child in 2005. We talked about how fatherhood has maybe changed you a little bit. What do you find are the most rewarding things about being a dad?
Seeing how cool my kids are and what good people they are, to the core. I love both my boys, and I'm endlessly inspired by them. They're very different from each other, and so that's really that's inspirational. Um, and wait, what exactly was your question again?
So my question was, what are the most rewarding aspects of being
Rewarding
a dad?
aspect.
So yeah, you're talking about seeing who your child becomes. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
yeah, and it was really fun as the kids started to get older to watch them work towards independence, which is something that you're obviously earlier on than where I'm at, but you're far enough along so that you're seeing your kids' growth towards independence. And I'm not talking about like financial independence. I just mean autonomous little beings,
Yeah.
and that's rewarding to me to see them acquire wisdom along the way, and build their intelligence, and just become independent. And for me, one of the things that I loved to do is to do like physical activities with them, like whether it's skiing, or in my case, my older son and I take very long bike rides, like
Okay.
multi-day bike rides, and
Wow.
that's been among the most rewarding activities or events. We started when he was 9 years old, me and him and his friend Ramon, and they're on these tiny little bicycles. We did a little 3-day 60-mile bike ride, which was fun. And so that was when he was 9. And then
Wow.
this past summer, when he was 14, not yet 15, me and him and two of his friends did a 500-mile bike ride from Buffalo, New York to Brooklyn, to our home in Brooklyn.
Wow.
And that's super rewarding, and fun as hell. Just about the funnest thing since I became a dad. And that's only one of my two kids. And my other kid, I also do some special and fun things with, but that's sort of the sort of grandest parenting achievement I've had, and brings me an endless amount of joy.
Oh, that's really cool. So you guys have kind of found something that you're both really interested in doing, and kind of connecting on that one thing. And physical activity is kind of interesting in that way, because it's very, like, you're very focused on that thing that you're doing, right? You're
Yeah.
not distracted by those other things. So is that sort of part of it too? Is that
Well, that's part of it. And one of the nice things about biking is with both my kids, but particularly my older boy, Arthur, sometimes like trying to engage him in conversation, if you come at him straight and be like, talk to me about X, it's like he gets a little skittish, sort of dodging it. But
Yeah.
when you're on a long bike ride and there's long periods and then you're biking a lot of time in silence, but we'd end up like talking a lot more on a day spent bike riding than you talk on a day spent not bike riding. So there's this sort of meditational aspect of mile after mile after mile of biking, but then sort of socially and conversationally, you can just sort of these different moods and periods of the day, of the biking day. So it's really, really quality time. And so, yeah, there's the physical activity of it is a big part of it, but biking is somewhat unique in the sense that you can be doing this you can be exerting so much while also holding a long conversation.
Yeah. Oh, that's really neat. It's neat to hear how you guys have kind of found that activity to bond over.
I highly recommend this to rad dads and to rad moms and rad non-binary parents, is that you can, in post-pandemic I'm talking, but like you can, although I've done this during the pandemic, but like you can bike 20 miles and you rent a cheap motel.
Yeah.
And then, you can create like a little loop in whatever city or county or wherever you are, but with like the cheap motel thing, by making it like a multi-day thing. And the bike rides don't even have to be long, but it adds this element of adventure. You can also go camping if you're super ambitious. But for me, if I'm going to spend 6 hours biking with 2 or 3 kids, starting when they're 9, it actually takes a lot of psychological energy to be like minding the safety of everybody.
Yeah.
Safety gets a lot. The more you do it, it gets much safer because you learn how to do it. My rides now are much safer than when my kid was 9 years old, sadly. But my point is, make some motel rentals, and it's a great adventure with kids.
Yeah. I like the word adventure. I think that's something that kids love, right? And when I think back to, my best memories with my family when I was younger, it was those times that really felt like an adventure, whether it was a vacation or it was, you mentioned camping, those types of things. Those really stick with you.
And it's an adventure for the kids. And adventure is one of the things that you lose, that rad dads lose, because when your kids are young, your lifestyle is such that it's not conducive to adventure.
Yeah.
So then, like, my kid was 9, not that old, and we could get on bikes and go and then sleep where we're going. And so that was the opening of adventure back into my life as a parent, was sort of like, again, this kids moving towards independence. And these kids are now so independently mobile at 9 that you can take a longish bike ride. So it brings them adventure and restores adventure.
Yeah, restores it for you as well as a parent. Yeah,
totally.
To kind of connect back to what we talked about before about sometimes feeling like you lose some of that.
Yeah.
Which you often do have a lot of in your youth, and kind of those years immediately preceding having children for many people. Those are kind of your most adventurous years in a lot of cases. So it can be quite hard to come to terms with that. So I like that. That's really neat. Jonny, are you able to share what your relationship was like with your dad?
Yeah. I had an awesome dad. Also awesomely flawed. Like most of us. Mm-hmm. I mean, like even my favorite people, well, as we all know, we all carry a lot of darkness inside of us. But my dad was a larger than life character. He was a bit of a lion. He was.
So what do you mean by lion?
He was a big guy. I'm like 5'10". My dad was like 6'2". He was a striking. I don't look. Actually, as I've gotten older, I look a little bit like him, but I don't really look like him. My dad looks ethnic. That side of my family, that's the Jewish side of my family, and my dad was born in London, and he had a big head of black curly hair, sort of olive skin, a big nose. He was sometimes mistaken for being like a light-skinned African American, and he was a passionate man who he came over from England. He was born in 1932 in England, and when he was 9 years old, the Nazis were bombing England. He was Jewish. The Nazis were, Nazis. And so my dad, even though he's not technically a Holocaust, so my dad died about 10 years ago, by the way, but he wasn't like, sometimes if you say a Holocaust survivor, that sort of means you were liberated from a camp, I think maybe. But my dad felt that he was a Holocaust survivor because the bombs were exploding in the streets of London. Yeah. And when they left on a boat, he and his mom, his dad stayed back, eventually came over to the US. But my grandmother and my dad got on a boat, and boats were getting sunk in the harbor. So he carried with him this deep Jewish rage, this fire, and he was a lion, and my dad could roar. When my dad yelled, it was a frightening thing. But when he came to America, he felt that America had saved his life, and America was this land that held up this virtue of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so my dad was sort of the ultimate immigrant who really bought into the American dream. He ended up becoming a lawyer. He went to Harvard Law School, but he ended up becoming a civil rights lawyer, and he did like stupendous civil rights work starting in the mid-1960s. And he had the opportunity to work alongside Martin Luther King once. And he went on to run the American Civil Liberties Union in Washington, D.C., the national capital chapter, which was the D.C. He wasn't the national head of the ACLU. He was the head of the D.C. ACLU. But that's where, a lot of doing a lot of work, like fighting on behalf of people's right to protest in front of the White House. My dad defended the Nazis' right to protest, which was insane that he did that, given what he went through and given what that threatened to his relations within his own family. Right. And he did this just great work. And the thing is, he was a warrior. He was a lion. He fought for justice, based on this immigrant's dream and an immigrant who fled the Nazis. He sublimated, he channeled that into his legal work. And you didn't want to go head to head with this guy. This guy would rip your head off. So he was, to me, he was a hero in that way, also a scary person. And that wasn't always positive, but he didn't like physically assault me or anything like that. Yeah. My sister got a little bit of some physical stuff, not, I wouldn't say child abuse, but he was a scary man, and there was always the threat of violence. But I don't want to talk too much about that because that's not how I think of him. Right. But it is part of the profile to kind of capture how larger than life and how strong this man is. And he was very handsome, his physical presence. So he was just a big, powerful person. And he loved the crap out of me and my sister and would have killed for us.
So your dad sounds like an amazing person. First of all, I'm still taking in what you've told me.
There was a lot of, from his generation, there was a lot of things that fathers should have been doing that they weren't doing. Part of that was culture, but also part of that is some men still rose to the challenge. And my dad was hands-on, but it was, there was some of this sort of traditional roles. My kids and I were latchkey kids. Our mom was also an amazing lawyer. She was a public defender. So she was also like a total hero. She's also a total hero to me. But in all this incredible legal work, my parents were both doing on behalf of the poor and the underserved and the discriminated against, that left me and my sister alone a lot. So
Right.
there was a lot of, we were latchkey kids. And I think my dad didn't think it was his responsibility to, be there for us after school. And my mom, he probably just thought that was my mom's responsibility, but she was also too busy for that as well. So we were left to our own devices, and I'm not scarred because of it.
Yeah.
I have an incredible upbringing. So
Well, I
it's just
think,
part of the situation.
yeah, and some of the things you're talking about too, I think there is there's generational differences there too in terms of the way, the traditional roles that parents played and things like that. So that probably factors in somewhat, and you kind of alluded to that as well. I'm wondering, like, given your dad and what he sort of fought for and what he felt was important and kind of like almost rooting for the underdog kind of thing. Is that part of why you got into the the scene that you did musically? So, that punk rock kind of scene. I mean, DC at that time, I mean, totally um, a game changer in terms of the history of punk rock music, and you were part of that. So did that sort of play into that? Did you have some of that kind of same fire within you that you kind of absorbed from your dad?
Yeah. Yep. Absorbed from my dad, from my mom, and from some of the people that we had in our lives, but also the city, Washington. Growing up in Washington D.C.,
Mm-hmm.
it was also it's a great place to grow up. But I think a lot of people who grew up in Washington D.C., a lot of white people are a little more at that time were a little bit more aware of this concept of racial injustice, discrimination. No, I'm not going to credit all white people in DC, and I'm certainly not trying to paint myself as some sort of saint at all. But I did, growing up in DC, with both my parents had done civil rights work, but then I had this experience of going to private school in Washington D.C. and then switching to public school, and that was a big piece of my own education around issues of racial disparity, racial discrimination. But a lot of people from Washington grew up with a little bit more of an integrated upbringing. I'm not saying fully integrated at all. I'm just saying when I went to college, I noticed this that I realized when I was going to all these other kids from the same sort of economic background as me, but I felt super fortunate to have had a good education both under the role modeling of the work that my parents did, combined with my own social education of having grown up in a majority African American city and seeing up close and personal how that plays out in education, how that plays out, in the way white kids get treated differently than black kids by the cops. If you're a white kid growing up in DC, you see this.
Yes.
It then doesn't become this thing of like trying to be like, no, cops treat everybody the same. Like, you grow up in DC, regardless of where you go to school, regardless who your parents are, if you're out and about in the city at that time, you saw how cops treated African American people, particularly boys and men.
Yeah. Amazing. I mean, it's kind of like this perfect storm of things that kind of came together to also to create that scene that you became so involved in, right? And that was a big part of that scene was that's
Human
kind of
rights.
civil rights movement and human rights and
Yeah.
so it's kind of neat to see how that was really a big part of you, not just sort of getting involved in the scene when you're 18 years old, but it really was part of who you were as you grew up.
Yeah. And there's this organization in the punk world, a group, Positive Force DC, that was the organization that, or maybe organization isn't the right word, group, that would like host most of the benefit concerts that DC bands like Fugazi and all the bands before them would, and after them would play. And that was a nice element of the DC punk world, is that there were actual like corollary groups so that like in DC, you could be pulled into punk rock, even though like maybe your primary interest was social justice issues. Like actually for me, like punk was never my favorite musical form. I do love some punk rock. I love it as a genre. I love what it's given rise to. But when I'm listening to music on my own, and even back then, I listened to a lot of punk, but particularly certain bands,
Hmm.
Bad Brains, Minor Threat,
Yeah.
but there aren't like dozens and dozens of punk rock bands that I love. But I loved the commitment to human rights and equality that was a part of the segment of the DC punk scene that I was fortunate to be part of. Now, punk, there's also Nazis or
Right.
Nazi punks, and there always have been. Me and my bandmates were just talking about this. The Dead Kennedys wrote Nazi punks fuck off in, what year was that? 82, 83? The Nazis were there in America, American punk, from the get-go. That was
Yeah.
always, it wasn't like punk got corrupted. It was just, there was different segments of what punk means. And punk was never supposed to mean a social clique or a social group. But I was fortunate to be exposed to this. But it was like one of the things, positive forces, one of the things that helped pull me into the DC punk scene. It wasn't the only thing, but it was being able to like work with other punks to help staff overnight shifts at a homeless shelter. To me, that was a big part of what drew me to punk, is that spirit, the do it yourself thing, not just to making music, but to trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
DC, there was punk percussion protests. People were, bringing their creativity full force to their political protests.
So I want to kind of connect this back to what you're doing today and talk a little bit about, what you're up to these days. So Akashic, how long has Akashic been? Has that been since 97?
97,
And
we published our first book,
okay.
which was a novel by a New York City writer named Arthur Nersessian, a novel called The Fuck Up, which is a great novel. It was in our first book, and now we're like 500 books in.
Yeah. So as I, look at your website and all the books that you have put out, it seems like inclusivity is a bit of a theme of your publishing as well. There's a very diverse range of types of books and subjects, and so is that kind of all connected to that same
It's connected to
philosophy?
my tastes and how my tastes.
Yeah.
I wouldn't actually say inclusivity. I would, to me, we publish the best books we can get our hands on,
Yeah.
and that makes it a very diverse list. But it's not so much about inclusivity. It's more about an aesthetic vision about what I and the people I work with think makes a great book. Just what we think are great books.
And you have some
Um,
great books for families and for kids too.
yeah, we started after. Well, I was always interested in publishing like children's books, but it was great then as a book publisher, you become a parent, and then you're suddenly an expert on children's books. I'm sure you, Brett, are an expert on children's books, and any other rad dads or rad moms or rad non-binary parents watching, I'm sure they are experts at children's books too. So it made it finally, I was able to, it's, when you're a book publisher, the concept is you're like an expert, like you've got great tastes, and then you bring a level of expertise to the packaging of the book, to the marketing of it, to the selling of it, like the whole aspects. That's what a book publisher is you bring expertise to every aspect of that process. So it's hard to publish books in a genre that you're not familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So then becoming a children's book expert simply by being a parent was very helpful. And we now publish a lot of children's books, not just picture books for kids. And I'm hoping I can talk a little bit about some of these picture books.
Definitely.
But also middle grade books and also young adult books. And so Akashic, we continue to publish a lot of books for adults, but these days our list is about half books for young readers.
Interesting.
And over time it'll change. We're not trying to say this is the way we're going to be always, but I didn't expect it to become such an important part of our list.
Yeah. And there's a couple books I know for sure, as I was looking at your website, that I hadn't realized you guys had put out, that and I know lots of listeners would be really familiar with, like Go the Fuck to Sleep, and the books in that series, which are, I know there's sort of a kid's version of that book, but it's really for parents, right?
Yes,
As
for
well.
parents or grandparents.
So yeah, those would be some really popular ones. Tell me what you guys have going on right now that's exciting.
So one of the things I want to talk about, and which ties directly to what we were talking earlier, is this idea of kids listening to music, and what music do you expose your kids to, or are they drawn to? So we were approached about the idea of doing this, and then subsequently launched this children's picture book series called LyricPop. And what the concept is that you take the words of a song that we love, and we license the rights to use those lyrics, and then we get it illustrated and turn it into a children's picture book. So, for example, like this, Good Vibrations,
Cool.
Which was written by Mike Love and Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, and illustrated. We got this illustrator, Paul Hope, to illustrate it. And so the book is the lyrics of the book are exactly just, the text of the book is exactly the lyrics of the song, saying, for like, these boots are made for walking. Yep. And
that's awesome.
We're Not Gonna Take It by Dee Snider. And so the text is just the song, and then we get them illustrated, each book by a different illustrator. So this might not look like a Twisted Sister song,
right?
but Dee Snider likes, it's like, and the idea is actually to create a book that's in the spirit of the song, but that is for children. So it's obviously, we're not going to be using songs that have a lot of profanity in them, or any profanity in them, because we're not changing a comma, we're not changing a word. And it's really fun sitting on the dock of the bay.
Yeah.
Respect, the Otis Redding song that Aretha Franklin famously performed. And we have, I'll get out of like salesman mode in a second, but I am.
No, it's cool.
I love this series and I'm excited about it. But we have a Pixies song, Where Is My Mind?
Yeah. Written
by Frank Black, by Black Francis.
Yeah. And
we have like a Coldplay, a book of a song based on Coldplay. And anyway, it's like the ultimate way for parents or grandparents to brainwash their kids with the music that they love. So if you love the Pixies and you want to turn your kids onto it, at age 1, start reading to them Where Is My Mind?
Yeah.
Which is also sensationally illustrated. These books look really cool. They're totally badass children's picture books. And so anyway, it's a whole series that we're doing, and it's super fun. But I love the covertness of it, of like the sort of how to brainwash your kids.
Right.
With it, it's a new series, but in 6 years we can look and see, did it work? Did you get your kid to love that Beach Boys song?
Yeah, I can only imagine what that would look like. Your child's eyes lighting up when they hear "Where Is My Mind" for the first time and go, "I recognize these words."
Although part of it is that you play the song, and then it's a way to like pull your kid into. You can sing it along.
Yeah.
You can sing the song with them. So it's super fun, and also just like I love all different types of music, and for example, like maybe my favorite music is reggae music. I'm a total reggae head. So this is African, the Peter Tosh song.
Yeah.
And it's beautifully illustrated by Rachel Moss, who's a Jamaican illustrator. And
wow.
So we're doing like country songs, reggae songs, pop songs, rock songs. We want to cover a whole bunch of different genres. This isn't just for like hipster Rad Dads.
Yeah.
It can also be for country music loving Rad Dads and reggae music dads.
And you guys, I looked on your website. You've got a lot of books in that series. We've seen a lot here, but you've got a whole bunch coming out later this year too.
Yep, yep. I Will Survive.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got a whole slate of books coming. So it's a fun series and a fun way to. One of the things that was cool about publishing children's books is just changing things up, and also a new challenge for us.
Yeah.
You know, keeping ourselves on our toes of trying to find new ways to sell books, and just keep the process of publishing books sort of electric and exciting.
Yeah.
And this series, you know, it's like when you get the book back from the printer and you look at it, and me, Jonny, I'm a huge Peter Tosh fan. I've been a Peter Tosh fan pretty much my whole life. And then to see like Peter Tosh's name on the cover of an Akashic book is just like, okay, I can retire now.
Yeah,
my
that's
work
awesome.
here is done.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. You know, as parents, you often do lots of reading with your kids and reading books that they're interested in, but it is a really different feeling, those books that you read with your kids that you're both very interested in, and both, you know, you both kind of bring that energy to that experience. And so I can imagine that would be the case with these ones.
Yeah, and when your kid does that hellish demonic thing of like making you read the same book
Yes.
like 5 times, these books are super short, and then it's much easier to read a book 5 times when it's a song that you like.
Right, exactly. Oh, that's awesome.
I think maybe I'll try to stop sounding so salesman-y. Let's see.
No, that's great. I was immediately drawn to that collection of books last night when I was looking at your website. So that's great. Anything else that you've got going on? I know you said you're still you guys are playing music. So Girls Against Boys are playing music right now.
Yeah, we're all 3 of my bands that I'm active with now, Soulside, Girls Against Boys, and Fake Names, we're all working on music actively right now, engaged in conversations and home recording. You know, it's very different to work on songs during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But me and my buddies have gotten into a really good groove of how to work on songs together remotely, and it's been a really nice. I've just sort of just before this conversation all morning, I've been just working on music here with my bass guitar and my interface right here, and my all important headphones, and this great room that I'm in. This room, my family lives in the house we've been living in for a while, but we moved onto a different floor, and I have this office which just is very conducive to reading and making music and whatnot. So
I've been noticing your nice fireplace behind you too there.
Yeah, it's not an active fireplace.
Oh, there's an amp in it.
There's a small bass amp in it right now. But it's been a very fertile time for me, for just like my, again, music and literature. They've long been preoccupations of mine, but my head and my heart are feeling super nourished during these horrible times. I'm not trying to say anything about the times we live in, the psychological challenges of thank God Donald Trump is gone, and that is helpful to have him be gone, but we still live in a wildly racist society, and I'm just fortunate to be able to have the access to music and literature, and live a life that has a lot of that in it. I'm super lucky.
Yeah, we've had to certainly that's part of your life in general, but I do find that's one thing during this pandemic, people have had to find and connect with those things that bring them joy, and you said nourish them, right? And because it is a very draining time. The last year has been very draining in a lot of ways. So, Jonny, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been really great chatting with you. I'm really excited to see your new books that are coming out in the LyricPop series. I hope some listeners out there will go check those out as well. I think, whenever we hear about books that are fun to read with our kids, we jump on those. So I'm guessing you'll probably have some visits to your website from our listeners. So that's great.
Great.
Um,
Thank you for having me, and talking to me. Has been a great conversation. And as you get a little bit older, I'm not. My kids are 13 and 15. Your relationship to parenthood evolves. That's also, sorry to go on, but that's also a little bit part of that. Being able to have so much music and books in my life. My kids, the age that my kids are at, is part of the pandemic. There's a lot of things that go into it, but it's also a reflection of my kids' age. But you've been a very, very, very nice to speak with.
Yeah, it's been great chatting with you. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have coming down the road here. So thank you so much for your time today, and take care.
All right, you too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.